What's up, what's up, what's up? Mr. Castro again. Let's take a look at the end of the colonies, right? We'll try to get this done hopefully this week, if not early next week, and we can start the American Revolution. So let's take a look at what was going on. So just a couple of things, right? By 1775, Great Britain controlled 32 colonies in North America, right? But we always obviously talk about the 13. It was these 13 that would eventually revolt. Canada and Jamaica was actually wealthier. 1775, the population was 2.5 million in 13 colonies total. The average age of a colonist was 16 years old. 95% of the population was east of the Alleghenies, which is part of the Appalachians. 90% of the people lived in rural areas, and most were Yemen farmers, right? So again, when we say that they weren't farming, they were. So again, here we have a picture, right, of what the colonies look like. So the diversity of the colonies, right? So I mean, it's a terrible picture because it's not in color, right? But again, just basically taking a look at some of the big numbers, right? So African, Dutch, English, Scottish, Scots, Irish, right? So again, the Scots that were living in Ireland trying to control the Irish, right? So there's Scots, Irish, and then of course German Americans. Colonial America was mostly English, but had other races and ethnicities, right? Germans accounted for about 6%, so about 150,000 people. Most were Protestant Lutherans, right? Again, the misname, right? The Pennsylvania Dutch. The Scots-Irish made up about 7%, or about 175,000. Again, had been transplanted in Northern Ireland. Most of them were squatters in places like Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. About 5% of them were French Huguenots, Welsh, Dutch, Swedish, Jewish, Irish, and Swiss. So again, just kind of a nice mix. America was land of opportunity, right? So again, this is kind of where we get the idea of the American dream or the Protestant work ethic, right? The aristocratic group, however, did develop. Most obvious division developed in the South, right? We had the rich plantation owner. Again, we had talked about this before with the actual structure itself, right? In the South. So again, we had this structure, right? So at the top were these guys, right? Next, you had these guys, these guys, these guys, and then these guys essentially made up the bottom portion. So workday America, right? Agriculture continued to be leading industry. Again, it will eventually be surpassed by cotton. Tobacco was the staple crop in places like Maryland and Virginia. The middle colonies, we talked about this, the breadbasket colonies. New England became a very big trade center, right? So Boston, for example, right, in terms of the triangle trade. New England rum, African slaves, Caribbean molasses, fishing and lumbering, right? Eventually, during the Restoration period and the period of salutary neglect, we begin to see more and more navigation laws being passed. And so in 1733, a really important one was the Molasses Act, which again would tax the sugar being imported into the colonies because the colonies were getting from France. It would first go, so from the Caribbean, it would have to go French sugar, right? So you're talking French sugar from the Caribbean would have to go to England, okay? And then it would actually have to go back to the colonies, okay? So back to the colonies, and what you would eventually get, right, is more money being made by the mother country. So again, you can see the triangle trade, things that were going back and forth, right? It's kind of an important picture to look at, right, in terms of what was going where, and the directions, right? So natural resources going to, certain places, right? Manufactured goods going back. So the colonists not only were producing a lot of the natural resources, right, but they were also they were the market, part of the market for England. Roads in 1700 were poor, only connected large cities. It took 9 days to travel between Boston and Philadelphia, where like now it takes roughly about 5 hours. Taverns and bars began to spring up along the roads. They became a great place of gossip and news. You put a few drinks in people, they began talking. So the taverns became a very important form of communication for the colonists. Intercolonial Mail was eventually set up, and it was Ben Franklin who helped establish that, which eventually becomes the United States Postal Service. Again, you can see the colonial roads by 1775. Like I said, not many of them. Again, picture of the colonial taverns. This is I'll show you some pictures too if we have time. When we went to Williamsburg, some of the taverns. So one of the things that also plays a huge role is the Great Awakening. So as again the colonies began to grow and grow, religious fervor began to die down. And so the word fervor just means sort of just belonging to, right, or dedication to. So American preachers intensified, leading to the First Great Awakening in the 18th century. A guy by the name of Jonathan Edwards became the most famous preacher. In 1734, he had his famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, in which he said, right, that the road to hell is paved with the skulls of unbaptized children. So the idea was to like preach emotionalism to get people into God. George Whitefield was even more fiery, right? He actually made Jonathan Edwards cry. And again, emotionalism became the center for praying. You can see there, right, the Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield. So the old lights, or the old preachers, they looked at the new preachers like Edwards and Whitefield with skepticism because of the emotionalism, right? And they said that people weren't really devoted to God, but instead they were actually being devoted because of the emotionalism. And so one of the things that we see, though, as a result, is we do see more and more people going back to church. And so you eventually get, in the same way that, like in New England, where you get Harvard to teach these young men to become ministers, you got new places also like Princeton, Brown University, Rutgers, and Dartmouth University, these colleges that spring up, which today are, of course, still important colleges. The Great Awakening is considered the first religious experience shared by all Americans, so therefore it becomes the first truly American movement. Again, there's a picture of Princeton in New Jersey, Brown in Rhode Island, Rutgers University, Dartmouth. Majority of the literature in the colonies was very English. When we get to the Revolution, one thing we'll talk about is that Ben Franklin, right, he actually wanted, German to become the official language. It was very European, right? Ben Franklin's Poor Almanac became a bestseller. Talk a little bit about it in class. Second most read behind the Bible. There was a really important case that took place during this time period called the John Peter Zenger case. This is really, really important. New York newspaper printer John Zenger had criticized the New York governor in terms of his governing. Zenger was charged with libel, which is essentially like lying. Zenger had hired an excellent lawyer by the name of Andrew Hamilton. And what ended up happening was he was found not guilty. And this led to this importance of freedom of press, which is eventually going to be in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Again, Andrew Hamilton. So by 1775, 8 of the 13 colonies had royal governors appointed by the king, so that's huge, keeping an eye. 3 had governors chosen by proprietors, so business people. Every colony had a bicameral legislative body, right? So there was some sort of home rule that had developed. Okay, there was an upper house that had been appointed by the royal officials, and a lower house which was elected by the people. Self-taxation with representation became very important because of self-rule, and the right to vote was only available to male landowners, so it became huge, right? So by 1775, you begin to see a little bit more democracy leading up to the American Revolution.